Welcome back to the Charles Aris podcast. I am Kimberly Shapiro, Executive Director of Aris Amplify. We are a contingent-based practice under the Charles Aris umbrella, specializing in roles between 70 and 200K, mid to senior level. I can dive deeper into that as we go into this conversation, but I think I'll turn it over to you, Ryan.
Thanks, Kim. Thanks so much for having me today. I really appreciate it. Looking forward to our conversation. For those of you that are tuning in, a quick introduction on myself. My name is Ryan Krumroy, and I work on the executive search side with private equity investors, and I spend my time helping those organizations to find chief financial officers for industrial-oriented businesses. I've been with Charles Aris since 2006 and played a pivotal role in helping the organization grow and scale the focus that we've had over the years on the finance and accounting side of the house. So, as I said again, I spend 100% of my time at the intersection of private equity, CFO, and industrial-oriented businesses, and can't wait for our conversation today. I'm excited about it.
Michael, would you like to give an introduction? We'd love to hear from you.
Yes, yeah. Thank you, Kim, for having me today. I'm excited to be here and share my story a little bit. But I am Michael Spohn with NextGen CFO. I am a managing member of that. NextGen CFO is a fractional CFO firm providing services to multiple industries, multiple size companies. And I've been servicing clients in that area for 20 years, and I'm excited to share some of my history and experience on this podcast today.
Thank you so much for that. I appreciate it. So, over the course of my career, I've been placing CFOs and most recently to my life at Charles Aris and launching Aris Amplify for them, their first contingent practice. I now support, our team supports CFOs. And many of our small to mid-sized clients wrestle with the fact, or the question, when do I need a CFO? And, when is the right time? And so that's the basis really of this podcast, is when to hire a CFO. So thank you both for joining. I'm very excited about this conversation because this has come up so many times over the last 20 years. And I hope that it will, our CEOs that are listening out there, founders that are listening out there, will find this very helpful as their businesses begin to scale. So I'm just going to jump right into the very first question, which is, when do you think, and I'll target this one at you, Michael, when do you think it's the right time for a growing company to bring on its first CFO? Is that after receiving first-time institutional investment? Is that when the current finance team is struggling to close the books? Is it at the onset of critical growth, either organic or inorganic? And so I'll turn that over to you to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. Well, what I will say is typically the right time is usually sooner than you think you should be hiring a CFO. A lot of times business owners are not apt to make that decision earlier, and it typically is later than the real need exists in the company. A lot of folks consider hiring a CFO based on the revenue size of the company. And to me, that's not necessarily the right component to be focused on. It's several other ones would be the complexity of the financials. You can be a high revenue company, but the complexity of the financial statements is not necessarily warranting a CFO. So that's one. One area is the financial complexity. I think two is, how fast is the company growing? Rapidly growing companies probably need a CFO sooner than a company that is just sort of plodding along and hitting singles all the time. And I think the other biggest component is two other components. One, just executive leadership. A lot of times business owners are, as they grow and they grow into a CFO need, they're just the only executive suite officer. Maybe it's a CEO, maybe they have an HR professional in there, but typically the time is to bring in some fresh leadership and some thought capital with that. And then I think you had mentioned in your opening, Kim, when there's a capital raise, when there's time to raise money to either grow with some speed or to grow strategically, and that's typically when a CFO probably should be in the seat guiding the company.
Michael, you made some good points there. Maybe I'll dovetail off of that a little bit, but you mentioned executive leadership, and I think that's a big one. And in some ways, delaying hiring a CFO, can save a company upfront money, but on the back end, it can cost them an exorbitant amount of potential of growth. It can really stymie the growth of the business, to delay the hiring of a CFO when one's needed. And so when I'm working with one of my private equity clients, maybe it's a lower middle market business that's buying a company for the very first time as the first institutional investor, where you're going transitioning from that founder owned and operated business into a professional leadership force where you're bringing in maybe an external CEO for the first time, institutional investors. There's some things that stand out that I think kind of dovetail a lot with what you've just said. Oftentimes you need a reporting rigor that wasn't present in the past. You've got maybe some mergers and acquisitions that are going to become the reality for that business. You've now got senior debt, or you've got complex covenants that need to be managed. You've got potentially some systems implementations, maybe we're merging maybe more than one business together at the same time, and thinking about systems integrations. Or you're going to have the potential to be going from a solely domestic oriented company into having an international aspect to the company. Or maybe you've got some treasury components to it, or there's a transaction in the future that you're going to be really thinking through about, hey, we're going to want to transact and sell this business yet again in 3 or 4 years from now. Delaying bringing in a CFO, if any of those can become the reality, can become, in my opinion, a very significant liability to have. You may be a accounting manager, a finance director, or something of that sort. You probably need to take a real serious look at bringing in a CFO. So.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right on all your points, Ryan. And I think one of them you made was, a CFO can bring their value right away, and a lot of business owners will judge the compensation level to, oh wow, can I really afford that? But typically, a CFO will bring their value plus almost in the first year of employment.
Question for you is from a fractional perspective, when does it make sense to bring in somebody on a full-time basis versus somebody that's more fractional in nature, and just kind of walk through and help some of our CEOs and founders that are listening when they're just like, but I just don't really know which way to go.
hmm Yeah, that's a great question, Kim. And the time to have a full-time CFO is typically when there's a major expansion or a major capital raise, and the need to kind of keep the ship steady every day of the week. But a fractional CFO really can bridge the gap all the way up to that point. Fractional CFOs can work 1 day a week, 2 days a week, 3 days a week. So the business owners can sort of step into the the employment of a CFO on a fractional basis well before the full time need, and it can be project based. It could be um, a technical based activity that's just specific. Maybe it's bank financing, for covenant reporting, or just funding for just general operations. CFOs are also very acute to risk management, insurance, and just the compliance aspects that exist. And then the other part that CFOs can come in and just do a little sliver of to sort of give the business owner some insight on the strategic side is cash flow management,
Mm.
budgeting, modeling, just financial planning for the strategic steps that are potentially necessary in the future.
Michael, for those listeners that are thinking through, hey, maybe it would make sense for me to bring in a fractional CFO. Maybe I haven't got to the point where a number of the themes that I mentioned for a full-time CFO were called out, but they're listening to this conversation right now saying, we probably need to bring in a fractional CFO. Do you have any counsel or wisdom, things that you would recommend folks to really look for in a good partner for them Is it an industry specialization? Or are there particular characteristics that you might call out here?
Yeah, one of the things, industry specialization is always sort of that quick start, quick hit. No, there's not a lot of training or ramp up from a CFO perspective if they have that specific area already under control. Um, Typically, CFOs in the accounting world or in the accounting space, where they're managing the accounting department, 85% of the accounting for businesses is the same across all industries. The 15% is more the industry specific. Um, so so being able to focus in on certain themes or areas is really a great thing for a fractional CFO. But to really hone into your question is, what should they look for? They're looking for a trusted advisor, a leadership partner. And I think, it's overlooked a lot to find the right cultural fit, the right just personality fit. And I think business owners should hone in on that a lot when they're ready to bring in a leadership partner for them.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's when I'm doing a full-time CFO search for a client of mine, I'll spend a couple hours up front with the client to really understand who they are, the chemistry, what's going to be needed. And then with the candidates, oftentimes I'll find a candidate that might be fantastic for one of my clients. It would be, really just problematic for another business. So there's certainly not a one size fits all kind of approach. But to your point, though, I mean, mentioning the methodologies and things of that sort. Sometimes you do find situations where maybe you've got percent of completion accounting for a business that's doing a lot of project based work, or maybe you've got a heavy inventory loaded business where you need someone that really understands inventory accounting for end of month close or things of that sort. So sometimes there are specifics. So for those listeners that are thinking through and are your particular business, hopefully this is helpful to get those thought processes going for yourself.
For that. I have a question too, Michael, speaking to the culture aspect of hiring a CFO. I think that is obviously from a full-time CFO hire. I think they do factor that in and they do take that into consideration, and it weighs heavily on their decision. But from a fractional perspective, I wonder if they're paying as much attention to their CFO partner. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think initially they don't. And one of the things that we try to do at NextGen is we call it permanent part-time, and it's really, we want to be your fractional CFO for as long as you need us until that transition period. And so that it's not just a transactional based, uh, come in, fix this one thing for us, or get us really stood up in that area and then leave. It's really, we want to partner with you to get you to that full time CFO, and our model is built to 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 hire ourselves or fire ourselves at some level at some point. And I think business owners, if they could think through that and not just make it completely transactional, fix one area, but this person can really partner with us for a longer period of time to get us to the full time CFO.
Michael, what does that typically look like for us, associates in your firm? Is that a 3-year engagement on average, a 4-year engagement?
So again, it really depends on the complexity and the speed at which a company is growing, and then their long term vision and strategy. So it typically is a 3 to 5 year, no questions. That's typically a good run rate for a fractional CFO. Some clients can go onwards of upwards of 10 years. And it just kind of depends on the structure of the business and where that strategy and vision is taking the business.
Just assuming there are no, there's not an institutional investment, there isn't some, critical reason to hire a CFO. Um, there has to still be some warning signs for a CEO or a founder, like their current accounting staff or finance staff just is not able to get the job done. So what are some warning signs that you could share with some of our CEOs and founders, and when it's time to start outsourcing or looking for a CFO?
I think the biggest one that I typically see is the CEO spending too much time in the finance area. If you find yourself grinding through month end financials with your controller, or asking for um, data that should be on a KPI sheet that comes out regularly, weekly, daily, however the business metrics evolve. That's usually for the CEOs that are listening and the owners. If you feel like you're too much in the weeds or too connected to the controller, the bookkeeper, it's probably time to have somebody inserted in between to kind of be that bridge that understands both sides of the equation, the accounting as well as the strategy.
A good segue into if you had to, if you get a few minutes to just showcase the difference between a controller and a CFO. I can't tell you how many times I've met with the client and they're like, I need a CFO. And I sit down and I talk to them and they share with me, the job description that they've written themselves and um, the details of the role. And I'm like, actually, I think what you need is a controller, maybe actually even an accounting manager. And so if you could just share the difference between a CFO and a controller, I think that would be helpful for a lot of listeners.
Sure. Well, I'll try to really simplify it. Um, Controller is the backward looking scorekeeper. So they're just keeping score, keeping and bringing history forward to a point in time. The CFO is more the implementer, the the decision maker, the quarterback on the finance component. And so more forward looking. So backward looking, forward looking. Um, and then I think the bigger differences, the or more obvious ones are the controller is just all about the accuracy of the current state of the accounting, and the CFO, in contrast to that, is should be all about the strategic and financial forward looking planning, growth. Partnering with the CEO to really enhance the business. Um, Responsibilities like, the controller is all about the short term, looking at just the here and now, the short term. That month is closed, the numbers are accurate. And then when you flip it over to the CFO, they're looking 1 to 5 years forward, trying to project out what the business could look like.
That's
Let
great.
me add
Thank
in a
you.
few thoughts here as well, Kim. So it's interesting the way that Michael just laid that out. I think is extremely accurate. Their controller almost certainly has an accounting foundation to their background. Okay. So their compliance issues and month end close and, like the regulatory elements and hey, we've got to have this tucked and tied up nicely. And usually they would have had some type of, public accounting kind of foundational background as well. On the CFO front, that could have been their background, but it doesn't have to have been. It could have been an economics background or a finance background, or they could have been in corporate development for a period of time and then transition into a VP finance role. So usually what my experience has been is that CFOs typically have a much better grasp of the entirety of the company and how to actually influence the operating decisions within a business. Like, what are the options that the CEO and the leadership team can go and pursue? What is the risk associated with those options? How do we play the strongest card possible to accelerate our growth and drive our EBITDA expansion without taking on too much risk? So that can be a challenge when you have someone that's grown from the public accounting side, controller side, to transition into their first CFO stint. Is that not every controller can make that jump? And not, and the other thing I'll say too is that it has to be there for a CFO. Typically, those folks have strong kind of board facing kind of external communication capabilities, where your controller may have a little bit more of a black and white, hey, this is the rules and this is exactly where we need to stay, and like this is the facts. And you certainly need make sure your CFO isn't off the radar. You may make sure that they're staying keeping that fiduciary or level responsibility within the business, of course. But you do need to have a CFO for most businesses that understands and appreciates risk and driving the growth of the business. So,
Cool. So before you ever get to the CFO, before you ever get to the fractional CFO, how do you suggest an organization build an effective pre-CFO accounting slash finance team? And really, it's probably more accounting team at that point. But what are your suggestions on who should that very first hire be? And then where do you go from there? And when do you go, from there?
Mhm. Yeah, great question. Again, it's all about the financial complexity that the
Mm,
business may have. Um, but typically, it's a controller. The controller is the sort of the 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 hub of the accounting department. Whether it's a bookkeeper controller or a real experienced controller, depending on the size of the company, but that person is the hub, and then really building the department out, with clerks and specialized cost accountants, and build the organization that way. One of the things that we look to when we come into it as a fractional is like who's supporting us, because we're only here a part of the time, and we need to either one be ensured that the staff is already capable of providing accurate, timely financial statements and the compliance aspects. If not, one of our first jobs is to build out uh, a department that can really support the organization based on our experiences.
right. Very cool. And Brian, anything to add to that?
yeah, depending on the size of the organization, I mean, if it's a sub $100 million business, the organization may just have a first time CFO or a CFO that has a small team underneath them, with 4 or 5 people. They may not have the luxury of having a controller as well. So you may need to have a CFO that's got good accounting and finance balance to them and their skill set. To Michael's point in building out the organizational structure. So this is one of the reasons why Charles Aris and Aris Amplify, we have active practices, because oftentimes in the landscape that we work in, clients are saying, we need to add to. And it's hard to find good talent. It is very hard to find good talent in the world. It's a very different landscape than it was 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And that actually takes us right to our next question or section, which is why, and of course, we all have something to add to this. Why do companies struggle to hire finance and accounting leaders at any level? Um, I have my own, answer to that question, but I would love to hear from you two first.
So for
Yeah.
sure, the private equity landscape has really raised the bar for what's needed within those businesses. And since so many companies have been acquired by private equity in the last
Mhm.
15 years, lots of consolidations taking place, and the need for data, the real understanding of KPIs and metrics and business intelligence, it has changed the role from more of a historically more of a historic looking type of position into now much more of a futuristic and kind of path charting role as well. It has lessened the numbers of available finance executives in general. Those folks have leveled up. They're all stepping into equity level positions within those businesses, and we're simply graduating a lot less folks with degrees that are
Yeah,
entering
that's a
into the
huge
space.
one.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, and you've seen this, software automations and technology tools and things of that sort. I mean, just businesses don't have 40 or 50 or 60 people in their finance and accounting ranks anymore. It's been largely efficiencies have been driven in, and then some of the folks that would have historically gone into those careers have transitioned into data analytics type of roles and things outside of the traditional kind of finance and accounting path as well. So there's more options for those similar minded folks to pursue from a career perspective.
Mm.
I was going to speak to that too. Michael, before we get into that, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I do find that over the last several years, and you get more specialization even at the lower levels,
Hmm.
and so people aren't getting a well balanced look at businesses, and then so they're kind of pigeonholed in a specific area, and that for them to expand into a CFO role that's more forward looking, they don't necessarily have all the pieces of what the businesses do or the finance and accounting side, and so that just really limits the pool because of that specialization that have tended to occur.
Yeah, in a market that's already, or in a profession rather, that's already tight, right? There's just not as many individuals, as Ryan was saying, coming into the profession. I think it's down, I think I read 10% since 2019. And then there's a statistic that came out a couple years ago. I think it's actually trending back up in 2025, but individuals sitting for the CPA exam, I'm sure you guys saw that was like down 30% year over year. I did read recently that it's starting to trend back up, which is great to hear. But if you think about just individuals entering the profession at all is significantly down. And then you have boomers that are exiting at a mass rate. And so I think it's by 2030, the majority of the boomers will be out of the profession. There's just not enough coming into the profession to bridge the gap. And so there really has created, with the additional things that you two just mentioned, there is a true legitimate talent shortage. And we run into this, especially maybe I'm not placing CFOs any longer, but I'm certainly talking to future CFOs. And it is alarming. And I think a true, not to sound like I'm raising the alarm bells, but a little bit of a crisis when I think about, oh my goodness, where are we going to be in 7 to 10 years? Where are these CFOs going to come from? If we are not able to bridge this gap, or at least make this profession more exciting for the newer generations coming into it.
And Kim, that makes it really difficult for businesses that are looking to hire folks into, whether it's a controller position or a CFO position or whatever the case may be. My counterpart that works with me alongside in our industrial space, placing controllers into my clients' businesses, he's seen a tracked, market increase in our private equity clients that are extending equity to controllers, where in the
Yes.
past
Yeah.
that really wasn't a
You
reality.
did see that.
They're having to figure out, like, how are we going to be competitive? How are we going to retain those folks? How are we going to attract them in? And so, 15 years ago that was unheard of. Today it's becoming common.
I mean, I would even say 5 to 7 years ago, it was uncommon. I remember getting a controller opportunity was like, "Hey, this is amazing because I know beyond a shadow of a doubt we're gonna fill this, we're gonna fill it it's gonna, take no time at all." And now it actually, to find the right individual with the right skill set, and, it's just getting tighter and tighter and a little more challenging. Um, so yeah, it's the climate is definitely shifting. What advice, Michael, would you give a founder who's hiring their very first CFO today? Like, I feel like you kind of covered that in some of the things that we discussed, but if you just had to give them advice, what would your like top three things be?
Uh, One, and I don't want to repeat myself, but I probably will. One, like culture fit is huge because this is a leadership partner for your business, and so you really want to make sure that that is dead on. The expectation is their technical aspects are going to be there. That's what the resume should tell us in their bios. I think the other component that is some of the soft skills. We didn't really. Everybody thinks CFOs and controllers and the finance people have to be these technical geniuses, which I'm sure they all are. But I think the soft skills are really where uh, folks need to kind of hone in on. Communication, empathy, uh, just those things that help the organization push forward in a softer and comfortable pace. So soft skills is the other one that I don't think gets evaluated enough when a business owner is ready to make that hire. So
Mm, would agree. What do you think the biggest mistake that you see companies make when they hire their very first CFO?
too fast, just need it. They're already behind. They realize they need somebody and they're already way behind, and they just make the wrong hire, and
Feeling
It's
desperate and like, "I've gotta get somebody in here."
gotta
Yeah.
get it. Yeah, or, I've decided to sell the company, or I've decided to bring institutional money in, and the PE firms are coming in with MBAs, and they're really focused in on the financials, and the current team can't provide it, or provide it in a way that the the the, the PE firm folks want to see it.
My last question, and Ryan, you may have some of your own, but my last question is, what do you see? And again, you kind of alluded to this, through our dialogue already, but what do you think the biggest change that you're going to see, or we're going to see in the next like 5 to 10 years from the CFO seat? I think you spoke to that a little bit about just the soft skills, and that I think that's a big shift from what we used to see in a CFO. But anything else that you could call attention to that we're going to see in the next 5 to 10 years?
I think we're all experiencing the AI boom right now, and how does AI automation work within the finance function? I think it's going to provide data quicker. Uh, it's going to provide insight quicker, but it's still going to take somebody with technical and grounded methodology to really pour through that data. Because is the data that's being generated, is it right? So I think that's one of them, and I've talked a little bit about this. Is just this is a strategic partner. I mean, this person is sitting at the board level, and they, in my opinion, the CFO should become the CEO at some point in time. So CFO becoming the CEO, that that's not an unusual transition, and making sure that they're very strategic for that enterprise.
I may dovetail off of that, Michael. There's the best CFOs that I've placed over the 19 years that I've been here at our firm are the ones that really can break out complex financial situations to where everyone in the business understands it,
Mm,
to where
yes,
they're on the factory floor, they're in the warehouse, they're working with supply chain, they're working with the commercial team. They're looking at every single facet of that business. And it's the first time that many of those folks say, wow, now I really understand what the financials mean. Now I understand what my role means to the bottom and the top line of this particular company. And those CEOs or those founders that maybe hired their first time CFO ever are looking at it and saying, I no longer view this as a cost center for the business. I view this as a profit driver for the organization. And that's a pretty significant pivot, I think, where a lot of folks, you're going back to your earlier answer about biggest mistake that folks make, not really appreciating the difference between what a controller and a CFO do, and what their high points and spikes are. When you've hired that right CFO for your business, all of this comes together. It should come together. And if it's not, you probably didn't hire the right person.
great point.
Well, Kim, I think this has been just a fantastic conversation in general, and I'm glad to have been part of it. And we'd love to talk with any of the listeners out there that may be, asking those questions right now. Is it the right time for me to hire a CFO for the business? Or sitting down and saying, "Hey, let's talk through the next couple years and planning here for my future." We're always available.
Mm,
Right, absolutely. Thank you for that. And Michael, thank you so much for your time and adding your expertise.
Yes,
We
thank
really,
you.
really appreciate it. It would not have been as wonderful of a conversation without your experience and expertise. So we really appreciate that.
Folks, thank you so much for listening today. We've really appreciated your continual listenership over the years. Michael, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you as a guest on our show today. We wish you the very best with your firm and your endeavors, and the important role that you play in that fractional world today. Kim, we're so excited to have you with the venture that you started with Aris Amplify as a sister organization to Charles Aris Executive Search. You're doing great work there, and we appreciate your contribution. And for the rest of us here at Charles Aris, we just say thank you. You guys have a
Thank you
fantastic
so
rest of
much,
the
guys.
week. We'll see you soon.